It was the beginning of July when Leela, Jas, and I decided to escape to the coast for a much-needed weekend getaway. Our lives in the city were chaotic work deadlines, traffic, and the incessant hum of daily stress weighed heavily on us. This trip was supposed to be our sanctuary, a temporary reprieve from the grind. We'd rented a charming little beach house through a vacation rental site. The listing promised breathtaking views and absolute serenity, and it didn't disappoint. The house stood nestled among dunes, its weathered wooden exterior blending seamlessly with the environment. Massive windows overlooked the ocean, offering a panoramic view of waves kissing the shoreline. It felt like stepping into a postcard, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. That morning, the beach was unusually quiet. The seagulls' cries were distant, and the only sound was the gentle rhythm of the waves. "Too quiet," Jas remarked with a playful smirk as we set our bags down in the living room. "It's eerie in a way, don't you think?" Leela rolled her eyes. "Don't start. We came here to relax, remember?" The three of us had been friends since college, bound by a shared sense of humor and an unspoken understanding of each other's quirks. Jas, the boldest of the trio, had a knack for making light of even the most unsettling situations. Leela, ever the pragmatist, was our voice of reason. And then there was me, the cautious observer, always somewhere between amused and wary. After a quick lunch, we couldn't resist the pull of the ocean any longer. Changing into swimsuits, we made our way to the beach. The sun cast a golden glow over the sand, and the water was cool and inviting. For a while, it was bliss. We laughed, splashed, and let the waves wash away our worries. But then I saw him. Standing near the dunes, a man watched us from a distance. His figure was backlit by the setting sun, making it difficult to discern his features, but something about him felt off. He didn't move, didn't seem to have any reason to be there. "Do you see that guy?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Leela and Jas turned to look. The man must have noticed, because he began walking toward us. As he approached, the unease in my chest grew. He wore a button-down shirt and jeans, an odd choice for the beach, and his dark, unkempt hair partially obscured his face. But his smile, it was chilling. Wide and unyielding, it seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if it had been carved onto his face. "You girls here for a swim?" he asked, his voice gravelly and hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. Leela, ever the diplomat, tried to defuse the situation. "We're just heading back," she said, forcing a polite smile. But he didn't budge. His eyes, small and unsettlingly focused, lingered on Jas, who was still waist-deep in the water. "You should come to my camp," he said, motioning toward a makeshift shelter near the dunes. A tarp flapped in the breeze, tied haphazardly to some driftwood. We could have drinks, swap stories. It'd be fun. "No, thanks," Jas replied curtly, her tone betraying her discomfort. The man's smile widened, stretching impossibly further. "Are you sure?" It's a nice, quiet spot. Good for secrets. We're going, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Grabbing Leela's arm, I led the way back to the house, trying to ignore the sensation of his gaze burning into our backs. Once inside, we locked the doors and shut the curtains. "He's just some weirdo," Leela said, attempting to sound nonchalant. But none of us believed that. Nightfall brought a different kind of tension. The massive windows that had been so enchanting during the day now felt like vulnerabilities. Every shadow, every movement outside seemed amplified. We opened a bottle of wine and tried to distract ourselves with a movie, but the unease lingered, unspoken yet palpable. Then Jas froze mid-sentence. "There's someone out there," she whispered, her eyes wide and fixed on the window. At first, I thought she was joking. Jas loved to scare us. But her expression was genuine, her face pale. I forced myself to look. Outside, in the dim glow of the porch light, a figure stood motionless. My stomach churned. It was him. Before I could say anything, a faint thud echoed through the house. Then another, louder this time. The sound seemed to come from the back door. "What was that?" Leela asked, her voice trembling. Heart pounding, I crept toward the window and pulled the curtain aside. My breath caught in my throat. A handprint smeared in red was on the glass, as if someone had pressed their palm against it and dragged it downward. "Oh my God," I whispered, stepping back. "We need to call the police," Leela said, fumbling for her phone. We huddled in the living room, every noise making us jump. The thudding stopped, replaced by a scratching sound, fingernails dragging along the walls outside. It circled the house, methodical and unrelenting, each scrape louder than the last. The minutes felt like hours. When the police finally arrived, the noises had ceased. They found no one, only footprints in the sand and the bloody handprint on the window. "Probably a prank," one officer said, though his tone lacked conviction. That night, none of us slept. Every creak of the house sent waves of panic through us. At one point, around 3 a.m., I thought I heard faint tapping on the window. I didn't dare check. By morning, we'd had enough. We packed our bags in record time and left, not bothering to look back. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The beach, once our haven, had become a place of nightmares. Life went on, as it always does. The incident became one of those stories we reluctantly told, though we downplayed the details to avoid reliving the fear. 3 years later, a news headline jolted me back to that night. "Serial killer caught in connection to Gigolo Beach murders." I clicked on the article, and there he was. The same man with that haunting smile staring back at me from the mugshot. My hands trembled as I sent the article to Leela and Jas. We had been so close to becoming his next victims. Years passed, but the memory of that beach weekend never faded. It had been one of those rare moments when the chaos of life seemed to pause, replaced by the rhythm of waves crashing against the shore. That house had always intrigued me, perched on a cliff, overlooking the restless ocean, its shadow stretching across the sand like a silent sentinel. When I learned that my Aunt Clara had left me her beach house in her will, I was torn. She'd always been a mysterious, solitary figure, her life shrouded in whispers and half-told tales. Her death only deepened the enigma. "It'll be an adventure," my friend Alex said with his usual optimism, though his words did little to quell the unease gnawing in my stomach. The drive to the house was uneventful, the kind of journey that lulls you into a false sense of security. But as we pulled into the gravel driveway, the house loomed above us like something out of a Gothic novel. It was an old Victorian structure that had seen better days, its once pristine paint peeling and its weathered wood creaking in the salty breeze. The windows, dark and lifeless, seemed to watch us as we approached. "This looks more like a haunted house than a beach house," Alex joked, his laughter sounding hollow against the vast silence. I forced a smile, but I couldn't shake the unease creeping over me. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay, a musty odor that spoke of years of neglect. The floorboards groaned underfoot, each step echoing through the empty halls. Faded portraits of our ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow us wherever we went. It was unsettling, to say the least. As we explored, we stumbled upon a heavy bookshelf in the study. It was odd how it seemed slightly out of place, as though it had been moved recently. On a whim, Alex gave it a push, and to our astonishment, it swung open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down to a hidden basement. "Should we go down?" Alex asked, holding up a flashlight. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But curiosity got the better of us, and we descended into the unknown. The basement was cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. The walls were lined with strange symbols, pentagrams, and unfamiliar script etched into the stone. In the center of the room was a red cloth adorned with candles, bones, and a locket I immediately recognized as Aunt Clara's. Alex picked up a dusty book resting on the cloth. "Looks like her diary," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That night, I struggled to sleep. Dreams of Aunt Clara haunted me. She appeared as a ghostly figure, her translucent form chanting in an unknown language as shadows danced around her. Her eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce through my soul. I woke up gasping for air, the room cold despite the windows being shut tight. The unease that had gripped me since our arrival only deepened. The days that followed were filled with unsettling events. Items disappeared only to reappear in strange places. An old radio, long forgotten in the corner of the living room, turned on by itself, playing eerie, static-laden tunes that made my skin crawl. And Alex's behavior began to change. He grew distant, irritable, and short-tempered, a far cry from his usual cheerful self. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into Aunt Clara's diary. Her neat handwriting painted a chilling picture of her life. She had been deeply involved in a cult, one that sought to manipulate souls after death. The entries grew darker as I read on, detailing rituals and sacrifices. The final pages sent chills down my spine. The ritual requires the blood of my kin and one bound by love. Only then will it be complete. What are you reading? Alex's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, his expression blank, almost lifeless. Just some old notes of Aunt Clara's, I replied nervously, quickly closing the diary. He stared at me for a moment longer before turning and walking away. His footsteps echoed down the hall, each one reverberating with a sense of foreboding. That night, I dreamt of Alex and Aunt Clara performing the ritual. Their voices echoed in unison, chanting words I couldn't understand. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The house was silent, but the silence felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I turned to find Alex's bed empty. "Alex?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer. I found him in the basement, standing by the altar. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, casting an eerie light across his face. "They've chosen me, Nadia," he said, his voice reverent. "It's an honor." His face twisted into a smile that wasn't his own, his eyes void of the warmth I'd always known. "You're scaring me." "Let's go back upstairs," I pleaded, taking a cautious step toward him. But he lunged at me, his movements erratic and unnatural. I barely managed to dodge him, running up the stairs and locking the basement door behind me. My mind raced as I searched the diary for a way to break the ritual. The locket was the key. It was the focal point of the ritual, the tether binding Aunt Clara's spirit to this world. Summoning all my courage, I returned to the basement. Alex was gone, but the locket lay on the altar, its presence radiating a dark energy. As I picked it up, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was Aunt Clara, or what was left of her. "You can't stop us," she hissed, her voice a cacophony of anger and despair. "Watch me," I shot back, my voice steadier than I felt. I ran to the cliff and hurled the locket into the sea with all my strength. A piercing scream filled the air, the sound of a soul being torn from its tether. The glow from the symbols vanished, leaving the basement shrouded in darkness. I found Alex unconscious on the floor. He stirred as I shook him, his eyes fluttering open. "What happened?" he asked, his voice groggy and confused. Relief washed over me as I realized he was back to his old self. We left the house that night, the oppressive weight lifting as we drove away. I sold the property soon after, unwilling to let its dark past consume anyone else. The money didn't matter, I just wanted to be rid of it. Life eventually returned to normal, but the memory of that summer lingers, a constant reminder of the darkness that almost consumed us. Some adventures are better left untaken, some mysteries better left unsolved. And as for Aunt Clara's beach house, it stands empty, a monument to the secrets that should have stayed buried. The waves crash against the cliff, their eternal rhythm, a haunting reminder of the price we paid for uncovering the truth.